Benedicte, my friends, and welcome to the Time Traveler's Tavern, where we share a mazer or two of mead with witty, intelligent humor to bring light to the Dark Ages and revelry to the Renaissance. I'm your host, Sister Mary Margaret Mead Hall. I'm so happy you're able to join us here tonight. I had the privilege of meeting up with a dear friend in the tavern for a discussion on his experiences while studying medieval medicine. I can say in complete honesty that the discussion contained some serious time travel and covered some really diverse areas. This is a way in polite company to affectionately say that neither Stefan nor I can talk in a straight line. Before we go into a bit more detail, please note that the information here and in the medieval medicine discussion is intended only for the purposes of entertainment and does not constitute medical advice. As we know, common sense is not common, but please do not try this at home and don't blame us if you do. Random strangers in a tavern are not the place to solicit accurate medical information. Stephen Shellenbean is a true time traveler and Renaissance man. He enjoys diving deeply into living history and has recreated moments spanning from the 14th century to a Renaissance-era German Landsknecht field hospital. He has researched and performed as Dr. Hall Jackson, the New Hampshire physician who served during the American Revolution, to the quirky John Kellogg, who promoted his brother's cornflakes. He and his wife also happen to own America's premier historically accurate tent company, Tentsmiths, www.tentsmiths.com. Listen closely tonight to hear the connection between leeches and proms, find out why he brings pork skin and PVC to his medical shows, and learn his top 3+ resources for additional research. But wait a second, we have a visitor. No, bad. That's my bread. You have the manners of a... Well, you are kind of a goat, aren't you? I guess this place really will serve anyone. I pulled a piece of parchment from the back of I'm not checking, bell collar, along with some sweet-smelling greens. Is that bed straw? Oh, no, wait, it's that other string herb, not rushes. I'll remember in a second. Oh, it's a letter from the Anchoress. How wonderful. A bit of the ague. Oh, darn. A good wife in Bath? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm so rude. Here, let me read it out loud for you. From the Traveling Anchoress, greetings unto my dear sister Mary Margaret Mead Hall. The drought of March being pierced to the root by the sweet showers of April, we began our pilgrimage to Canterbury with a small flock of kindred souls, whose tales did serve to shorten the way in mirth and reflection. Sadly, those same showers did also bring about in us an ague, and the damp weather, please note there is a P at the end of damp, has delayed our journey to your convent. We shall return to our travels some days hence, for there's much to tell of our travels uphill, down dale, and around the bend. We were fortunate to be offered respite by a fellow pilgrim, a good wife, residing in Bath. Of her kindness she hath shared her receipt for a delightful and healing drink, Maywine, which I offer you herein. Of sweet woodruff, of a certainty gather Gallium odoratum, not the common goosegrass, no matter their resemblance. Take you a handful, perhaps 10 to 12 sprigs, plucked from the tips of the plant, that it may continue to flourish at the root, to provide sweet-scented bedding. Place them in a warm, dry spot near the hearth, that they may dry somewhat. You will note the fragrance of new-mown hay arises as the plant dries. When a day or so has passed, add the sprigs to a good bottle of Rhenish or other light white wine of your preference. Let stand a day or two, that the woodruff fragrance infuse the wine. When it is to your liking, decant and strain, and chill the wine as it seems good to you. You may add a touch of sugar, or orange, or lemon before serving, but a good Rhenish should require no more than the woodruff. Though it is both charming and healthful to offer guests this fragrant drink with a fresh strawberry in the glass, I can attest that it maketh the heart merry indeed for the month of May. With this missive, the messenger bears you some sprigs of woodruff, that you may have the making of some fragrant May wine. I do pray he has not eaten them. Your loving sister in pod, the Traveling Anchoress. It was so lovely for her to check in. I do miss my dear sister. Now on to the far-spanning time-traveling discussion with Stefan. I hope you enjoy this as much as I have. Tonight we are joined in the tavern by my friend Stephen Shellenbean. He is a man known by many names throughout several time periods. He's one of the few folks I can honestly call a genuine Renaissance man.
Ooh, I like that.
Thank you. What's true. So I'm going to let you talk about all the things you've studied, if you don't mind. Can you start us in with that?
Sure. I often credit my studying and my path towards history beginning as a Boy Scout and earning my Eagle and learning about history starting there, and then when I got to college, studying education and eventually targeting more towards history again is when I got introduced to the SEA. I worked Ren Fair, and all of that led to my love of history. But outside of that, I've been and am once again an EMT. Um, I spent 20 years in software. Um, I've I've just done a lot of different things. I've taught sword fighting, armored combat, been a director of Renaissance fairs. I don't know. That's a small sampling. My resume looks like, why have you only been at this job for 2 years? So um, it's
Your
because I want to do something different.
CV list is a little long.
It's true.
When did you first get into studying medieval medicines?
So I'd been directing fairs, and we kind of branched out. My now wife and I, we had a company, Autumn Tree Productions, and we're kind of branching out to doing more educational programs. And so we wanted to be able to offer things to schools. Um, and we had a couple of programs that worked well for that, but we really wanted to be able to hit on a science based, a targeted program. So
Teach to
I
the
worked
STEM classes.
exactly, you got to hit a little bit of everything, not just the history side. So yeah, we worked up a program for talking about medieval medicine, and that meant I had to learn about medieval medicine and get a blacksmithing friend, to make me some reproduction tools
Oh,
and
cool.
work up a whole script and everything that could work for a sixth grade is where we targeted first because we had a contract with a Connecticut school, and it worked out really well. And I found it fascinating. So since then, I've done not only medieval, further into the Renaissance and the late 18th century medicine. I've done early 20th century medicine as Dr. John Kellogg. So I've been able to kind of spread across many centuries, which has been fascinating.
You got to
I'd
peddle those
already,
cornflakes.
you got it. I mean, he didn't want, by the way, odd fact, his brother pushed for cornflakes. He really liked the brand ones. But anyway,
Seems like a brand
yeah,
kind of guy.
he was very much a brand kind of guy. And I think some of it also harkened back to the fact that I'd been an EMT for 2.5 years. So I already understood a lot of the underlying principles involved. And so that fascinated me too. Like, where did this all stem from? How did we learn it? And how did we get to where we are?
Nice. When you were gearing this towards a sixth grade audience, was there a certain time period that you focused on or just the Middle Ages in general?
That one, we kind of went broad on the Middle Ages because the way, especially when you're in sixth grade and middle school curriculums are kind of like, it's the Middle Ages, and those of us who know are like, yeah, that the Middle Ages isn't really necessarily a thing. Um, it's kind of
What's
hard,
1,500 years among friends, right?
right? Exactly. Like, what are you gonna say here? So obviously, those of us in the know break it down by who was in power and where the braining, what was the biggest focus in Europe and everything else. And of course, all of this totally highlights European history and ignores the fact of everything going on in the Middle East and in
Right.
China and everything else. So, but we
A little
did
Eurocentric.
very Eurocentric. So we focused, more towards 14th century. One of the nice
Cool.
things is you're able to highlight the influence of the Islamic and Judaic impact
Because of the
on
Crusades.
medicine. Well, that and honestly, the nobility in the 1400s, they if they had a choice, they were going to hire a Jew or a Muslim to be their doctor because they were so much better at it than any Christian was at the time. Um, they didn't necessarily have the same prohibitions on exploring how the body actually was made up. They also just, I mean, we're talking about a time period when Islam was kind of at the height of scientific achievement. They were really doing so many amazing things. So we got to highlight a couple of those things in the program as well, which is kind of nice.
That's awesome. So, did they still have the same kind of humor theories that were popular in Europe at that time, or what were the difference between the Jewish and the Islamic scholars' take on medicine?
Well, so I am much more knowledgeable about European medicine at that time. I have a friend, Ray, who was actually for part of our 16th century reenactment unit for a while, who did an amazing impression on Islamic medicine. So most of what I know about that comes more from her research, which is that there was still that still played a part. They didn't fully understand things like the pumping of the heart and endocrine systems and all that good stuff
Mm.
that play in. Um, where they seem to really excel was, or certainly surpass their European counterparts, was partially in surgery and also in a maybe not a better understanding of infection, but a different understanding of infection that led to less negative results. And
E.g., the
also,
patients lived.
right, right.
Okay.
And also a willingness to study and employ a slightly more. It wasn't truly a scientific method, but maybe a predecessor to. And well, that didn't work. What else could work instead of well, that didn't work, but that's because that person wasn't truly right with God. So obviously, it was a, a little different approach, and that's I don't want to undersell what was happening in the Middle Ages with there was so much done by the clergy towards what would become the scientific method, but there were barriers that they had to work around. So
So, at this time in Europe, was were medical issues mostly under the realm of the clergy?
that's a great question. So there were doctors, there were physicians. Like you
Okay.
could go to university for physic, and there were also they tended to separate like physical intervention, form of surgeries and the like were separate. They were often handled by butchers or
Barbers.
uh, barbers, right?
Barber surgeons, yeah.
Yeah, proto veterinarians largely. Were like so one of
Veterinarians?
the yeah because one of the
Sorry, I wasn't
benefits of
expecting that word.
right? Well, they didn't have them, but one of the benefits of a butcher is they actually understood the way an animal's body worked in a way oftentimes that a doctor didn't because it was illegal in most cases to actually dissect a human being, right?
Mhm.
Your I don't know loophole is to dissect the body of a convict after they've been hanged. Literally, people would line up and be like, "Hey, I'll pay you 3 guilder to take that body, but I'll give you 4," kind of thing, and just
Like an
it was
auction.
right. Like it was like, oh,
Gosh.
who can make a deal with the executioner to get the body after it? Because those people were going to hell, so you could take their body and do what you wanted with it. They weren't going to show up on the day of
They
reckoning,
don't
that
have to
kind of thing.
oh, in the name of science. Okay, cool.
Well, if we call it science, sure, it became science. But whereas like guy who's worked and helped keep a horse alive or butchers a cow might have a better understanding of certain things, and they also the guy who's had to amputate or take care of a goat or something like that, he might be really quick and good at doing that to your friend when their foot gets stepped on by a horse and crushed and now it needs to be taken off. So surgery was considered very low, but especially at wartime, super important and oddly successful.
By very low, what do you mean? Like just a low art or like not requiring
Yeah,
much? Okay, not requiring much study.
it wasn't a science. It was it was just a thing that,
Sheer
hey,
dumb
that guy
luck.
can do it. Yeah, well, that guy can do it. Go pay him. I went to college. I shouldn't be doing this kind of messy thing. And there are totally exceptions, as there are throughout all history. But yeah, largely they were looking towards, oh, if you get badly hurt, go see the barber. He can take care of that. You know.
Again, all bets are off during warfare or combat situations.
Hmm.
I presume field medicine would be totally different than, the king has a bad case of gout.
You're absolutely right. The king is not bringing in a barber to look at anything. The gout is going to be diagnosed and his humors are out of whack, and here's how we have to do all this, and you should lay this way and say this many Hail Marys and do all these different things. On the battlefield, someone who's just, taken a very serious blow to their forearm, we got to get it off, and we got to get it off quick. And that's a very different skill set. I mean,
I hope so. Yeah.
you're right. So surgery starts with these barber surgeons, and at least in the European school of thought, and then we see it not change a ton for hundreds of years, but eventually it hits a point where doctors and physicians start to learn how to do that sort of thing, and they're kind of cross training. So by the time we get to like the American Revolution, it is physicians who are doing the surgery. It's not their favorite thing to do necessarily. They're men who are trying to, they're very learned. They're trying to diagnose things and figure things out about the body. But one of the impressions I've done a number of times and I really enjoy is Dr. Hall Jackson, who was a physician in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And he served as
He
a
was a real
surgeon.
historic person.
Oh, yeah. No, this is a
Oh, cool.
guy,
Okay.
he's super cool. He served as a surgeon in the very early days of the revolution, Bunker Hill and that kind of thing. He went to
Oh, wow.
Boston
Okay.
and volunteered his services. But he's also a guy who ran a smallpox hospital off the coast of New Hampshire, and incorporated early methods of keeping a clean studio. Like he would use vinegar to clean down the hospital.
So
Didn't
early
totally
infection control.
Right. Didn't totally grok how all that worked, but found that his patients did better if you cleaned regularly and used things like vinegar. So inadvertently, maybe killing off germs. Totally did,
Nice.
long before germ, well, longish before germ theory. And then also a guy who learned that a colleague in Europe had been studying purple foxglove and its ability to reduce what they call dropsy, what we now know as congestive heart failure, and ordered seeds and started to introduce it to some of his patients, and was one of the earliest uses of digitalis, which is still in use today.
Huh?
235 years later, or whatever it is, we're still using the same drug for congestive heart failure. So it's a long, fascinating, convoluted history of how we got to where we are. But yeah, um, all that to say, surgery, fascinating. Wartime ties all together.
No, I love the threads that start out in, the depths of history and that carry through to the modern day with us. That absolutely fascinates me.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, one of my, back to the whole amputation thing. One of my favorite things to do when we do demos, and we
what was
do
amputation?
demos. Oh,
Sorry.
yeah, I love to do an amputation demonstration. It's great fun. We've gotten good at it in our 16th century Landsknecht unit. We'll make up a fake arm. We like, got PVC bones running through it and
Oh
a
my
pork
gosh.
loin in there, and we'll wrap it in like pig skin and put a glove on the end. And we've got like tubes, like plastic tubes, so that the guy being amputated can be like shooting blood if he wants.
Oh
Um,
my gosh.
so
That
we're
is
doing the whole
brilliant.
scallop. Yeah, we're doing the whole scalloping and everything, and somebody's narrating while the physician's doing the whole thing, and meanwhile the amputee's wife is nearby, like running her rosary and saying her paternoster and everything else. and we'll just go through the whole thing and do an amputation. But I love talking about it after the fact. I once had a guy come up to me. He's like, "So I am a surgeon. I have done a number of these amputations, and you know that we do it pretty much the exact same way as what you just showed."
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, "Yeah, I know. It's amazing." So yeah, I now have a buzz saw, and my patient is unconscious, and I've got really good methods of, closing off arteries and veins and everything that didn't exist obviously in the 1500s. But really, at the end of the day, it's the same stuff. I'm still scalloping the skin to get it to fold back over top and make a good stump and doing it like all the stuff you just talked about. That's exactly what I do. I'm like,
Oh my
that's
gosh.
that's cool and sad.
You have to have disclaimers when you do these presentations for children in the audience?
We do that. My favorite was once we we'll mix up how we make it happen. Like, oh, it's a sword fighting accident. And there was one time we had one of our guys go like back behind one of the tents because we do Landsknecht. So early 1500s, they have guns, they have matchlocks,
Mhm.
and so we set off one of the guns, and then he comes out like he just inadvertently, had a misfire and had it blow off part of his hand, kind of thing, right? So we'd already warned our audience, and he comes running out, and we'd like start prepping and everything, and all of a sudden EMS shows up at our
Oh
at
my
our
gosh.
encampment, and they're like, "We heard somebody came over and said someone got hurt with a guy," and we're like, and I know all these guys because we do this. I'm like, no, but the problem is I was in the tent with the guy. We're prepping him. We have to like hide his arm and put the fake arm in place to make it all look good. And finally, like the lead EMT busts into my tent, and he's with one of my guys. He's like, "Hey, he wouldn't talk to anyone but you." I'm like, "What's going on?" They're like, "Oh, we heard someone got hurt." I'm like, "Yeah, it's him. We're about to do our amputation demo." He's like, "Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's just Stefan.
It's
Okay, cool.
that's this time. Oh, whoops. I should have looked at the schedule. You're all good." It was pretty entertaining. But yeah, we've gotten a little better over the time of like, hey, everybody, you've all looked at the schedule, right? Yeah. If anyone comes screaming to you, someone's been hurt. It's fake. It's all fake.
That is brilliant. That is absolutely brilliant. So I'm gonna jump back here. When you said about
Yeah.
the theories of the humors and everything, were those all just shot when it came to battlefield surgery, or were you actually taking considerations of the body's humors and what does this person's temperament need right now or whatever?
I think there's an impression a lot of times when people talk about the humors that it was the sort of thing that only ever came up when you went to a physician because you weren't feeling well. That you're like, oh, doc, I'm having, I don't know, constipation or something, and they prescribe you should eat more of this or take this or the old Blackadder sketch, like put leeches on it, whatever. But this literally was something that just played out all the time in your life. It was kind of like the way, especially in modern America, we don't think about the constant prevalence of religion. I don't think we think about the constant prevalence of the humors. Like people would plan out diets. I mean, so we're now in the spring, which is a sanguine time of year. Our blood is starting to get high and excited, and that ties in well with the fact that obviously all the animals are starting to get excited and a bit randy, and so that played into what you would eat. Like, well, it's great that the greens are coming back, and now we can have much more. We can counteract our our hot blood by eating things that are going to try to offset your sanguine. So, like you literally plan out your meals to make sure there was a balance. And this got further up you went in hierarchy, like you see feasts being planned out this way. Like, okay, let's make sure that we're presenting foods that are going to have each of the humors to keep everything in balance. because you don't want your guest getting too randy or something, right? So you've got to play all that out. It was literally
Seasonal
much
eating.
like you. Yeah, it's like the food pyramid that we grew up with, right? Like, oh, you need to have so much of this, and you need to not have too, have to have dairy and balance it. It's the same thing that they were doing. They just built it into their everyday lives.
So the medical model of the time was that pervasive, the humor
Oh,
theory.
absolutely. Absolutely. You see it all over the place. One of my favorite places to look at it is Chaucer and Shakespeare. What are the terms that they're using to describe people? They're
Oh,
calling them
mhm.
melancholy, they're calling them choleric, they're calling them sanguine because these are all terms everybody knew and understood and would instantly, if you described a character that way, somebody would instantly go, "Oh, I know where his humors are."
They had that point of reference.
Right?
How long did those theories stay in vogue?
A very, very long time. Um, this is something that starts with Galen in
Mm.
Greece. It's prevalent throughout the Roman time period, and then of course, folks, at least later in the Renaissance, were big fans of Rome and wanted to emulate that. Um, but even into the American Revolution, even into the mid 1800s, we see humor theory just being the
Really?
norm. Oh yeah,
Oh my gosh,
it's
I never would have thought of that.
well, one of the things that it often is laid at for why um, George Washington passed away is because he was being bled so much that he wasn't able to fight off the actual infection that killed him, and part of that was because bloodletting is the result of humor theory. It's that
Okay.
you need to balance the humors, and your blood's too hot. It's thin it out. And the problem is, if you take away too much blood, you're taking away T cells and white blood cells and everything else that actually fight off infection.
That unfortunately makes sense. So let's just bleed them out and they'll either get better or die with not a lot of middle ground.
I mean, and there's weirdness that early misunderstandings of pus and how that worked. And I think I told you when prepping for this, we could go on for hours about medicine and the history of it. It's a fascinating topic. So,
Many, many rabbit holes to dive into.
so many.
I was reminded of the line from Midsummer Night's Dream when Bottom is being introduced to the fairies, and he says something along the lines of Cobweb. I shall desire you of more acquaintance, Master Cobweb. If I cut my finger, I shall make bold with you. So I believe Cobweb is used to staunch bleeding.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one of the things that often I think it's overlooked, though it's gotten some good treatment in more recent history, is the fact that we think about medicine in the Middle Ages and the like being the realm of physicians and surgeons, but the midwife, the herb wife, these there were so many people, largely women, who were really keeping people alive. You have things like willow bark. You have so many like homeopathic treatments that some even use today. Some completely horrible ideas. Don't get me wrong, but many things that just were being, like, oh well, we can use this moss, we can use this cobweb to staunch the wound. We can use different herbs to help balance things out. Some of that was humeric, much of it was humeric, but some of it had an impact. And it's just always entertaining and fascinating to me when we discover or uncover these old recipes and go, oh, that's actually useful. I mean, one of the easiest examples nowadays is the fact that leeches are used again in medicine, and they went away for a while, but they're back.
Years ago, I read a fascinating book that talked about, and I don't remember the title anymore. It was about honey, leeches, and maggots all being
Hmm.
used to treat medicine and how that was done in the earlier time periods, but also are now being used again in modern medicine.
Well, then now we have a better understanding of how to use them, right? But just to use all those examples, but honey is an amazing treatment to wounds and antibiotic. It theoretically is antibiotic. It's there's different studies around it, but it's also really great for things like allergies, right? Um, and then you've got maggots, which we've learned will eat dead flesh, but don't want to necessarily attack the living stuff. So it's a great way to deal with necrotic flesh. And then you've got leeches that they've not only discovered that one, if you ever get punched in the eye and have to go to prom the next day, it's a great way to get rid of a black eye because it'll suck out the bad blood.
That's
But
timely advice
two,
to any folks going to prom right now.
right there
Good
you
timing.
go. Anybody, if you're thinking about it, look for you can buy medical leeches. I've done it. They're totally sterile.
Where
But
you can
the
buy
other,
leeches.
oh yeah, I
You
have
don't have to
done
just
this online. No,
okay,
you don't need anything special. They'll ship them to you in like a refrigerated little thing, and then you leeches are amazing. They only really have to feed every 6 months to a year.
really.
Um, yeah, and you just lay it out on your arm and let it just suck its fill, and then pull it off. Don't do what they did historically, which is put them between two pieces of wood and squeeze out all the old blood, and then put it on to the next poor sucker to come along. Um, Keep it to
Yikes.
yourself. Don't share leeches. Friends
Don't,
don't let
it's gonna
friends
be a
share
new
leeches.
PSA in bathrooms.
Right. My unit, we'd buy like three or four, and then those of us willing to have a pet leech would just take it home, and we'd name it things like Merrill Leech or Goldman Sachs or whatever, and feed it for the downtime. Um, but they've also found that the chemicals that leeches secrete help rebuild, maybe not necessarily rebuild the veins and arteries in a wound, but what they do is they take away the swelling and the irritation that allows the body to rebuild itself, combined with the fact that leeches produce their own antiseptic, and that
Oh
they
my gosh.
yeah and their own not only are they antiseptic, but they actually produce a numbing agent so that it doesn't bother you that they're there. It's pretty cool. Like they're pretty amazing and have made a big headway back into modern medicine. So
That is disturbing and fascinating all at the same time.
I am chock full of all sorts of disturbing and fascinating things.
Bless your wife.
Yes.
Can you give me 3 of your top book recommendations or resources if folks want to learn more about medieval medicine or Renaissance medicine or how not to get EMTs called when they're doing a demo?
The number one for that is just let the EMTs know ahead of time what you're about to do. Um,
Don't try this at
th-
home, please.
right. There are there is a lot out there about the history of medicine. And honestly, Wikipedia is a good jumping off point. It's not a point that you should reference, but the history of medicine covers pretty much everywhere. One of my favorite quotes, and I can't remember the name of the archaeologist who was teaching the course, but when she was asked by a student, what defines the start of civilization, she said, um, the first human being that we ever found, or the first incident of a bone that had been broken and healed, because it meant that human beings took the time and the care to help someone who should have been left to die to recover, right? And
That is a
really, that's
fascinating way to point that.
yeah. I'll have to send you. I'll look up her name. It's a great quote, and it's really that to me defines the start of medicine, right? Like, okay,
It
we're
shows
going
healing.
to sit right. It shows healing, and so this is as old. Medicine is as old as human civilization. But for me, I one of my favorite go tos is the Cambridge Illustrated History of Medicine. The copy I have is from 1999. There's probably a newer one out there, but it's really got I think maybe my favorite thing about it is as a chronology at the back,
Mm, nice.
where it just like targets. We know on this date this happened, and it includes a lot of medical stuff, but it also includes stuff like Marco Polo goes to China.
So you get it
Um,
in like a more complete picture,
absolutely.
more timeline.
And it's got a really great like further reading section in it.
Cool.
There's another medicine, an illustrated history. The thing I like about this one over the Cambridge is I find it's got so many more. It's got a ton of photos. It's almost a coffee table book. Um, and that can be really nice just for like, I'm just going to flip to this time period and learn a little
Mm,
bit about it. It again has great bibliography. And with me, any history book really comes back down to how good is the bibliography. For medieval medicine, there's a book by Juliana Cummings called Medicine in the Middle Ages, Surviving the Times. She's got this kind of like modern TikTok, like clickbait title on it.
mm.
But I like the fact that it's got a lot of, it's really, easily read. And then she references a lot of good modern writings on medicine in the back. A lot of her bibliography, while not pointing to primary sources, which we'll talk about in a second, um, gives, she's got a lot of great tags to theses and things like that, which I enjoy. The end of the day, if
Nice.
you're ever going to represent historical medicine, you have to go to the primary sources. You can't pass on reading Galen or reading, let's say you're doing Civil War medicine. You've got to read the surgeons' manuals of the times, and you got to see what they were learning, what they were doing, and why they were doing it. Um, and they don't always explain the why, but oftentimes you can find the why. But you can do things be like, oh, I need to be able to perform an amputation in under 2 minutes. Got
Oh
it.
my gosh.
Um, yeah.
The
So
primary sources are key.
they are absolutely key and wonderful. And there are some really cool people out there who've done a lot of research online. It's all about your time period and reaching out to them. And there are groups on Reddit, there's groups on Facebook. I'm in some of them. These are
Nice.
really wonderful, disturbing people to learn from. I recommend checking all of them out.
Perfect. Thank you. Where can folks find you?
Sure. Well, I mean, the best place to find me is my business, which is Tentsmiths. My wife and I own what I consider the premier historical tent company in the United States. And yeah, so tentsmiths.com, Stephen, Stephen, at tentsmiths.com is probably the easiest place to get a hold of me.
You've made tents for reenactment movies, if I'm remembering right.
Yeah, movies, museums, Ren fairs, reenactors. If you've ever been to a historical event, good chance you've seen one of my tents. If you've seen like Last of the Mohicans or Dickinson or Power of the Dog or any number of historical movies, you've seen us. So
What historical range do you cover?
we start well. We say Roman because we do wall tents, but Roman wall tents were made out of hides largely. But we say Roman through World War II,
Oh,
and
fantastic.
but we do them out of canvas. So
It is always a pleasure to talk with you. And I do hope you'll come back. You're just a Swiss Army knife of a person, just with all the resources.
I am absolutely a jack of all trades, master of none, except for tents. I'm really good at tents. So
You're very intense.
I am. I have a lot at stake there, a lot on the line. Been canvassing my customer base to figure out I could go on and
Ouch.
on. So
Ouch. Then that's
yeah.
such a dad joke. Medieval medicine is certainly a topic very near and dear to Stefan's heart, as well as his other vital organs. I found our discussion both disturbing yet fascinating, and it honestly never occurred to me to think about finding a source for leeches. It was truly an enjoyable chat in spite of all the bad puns, and he left us with a lot of information to dissect. Maybe dissect isn't the best word to use here. Um, how about he left us with a lot of information to process? Yeah, that sounds better. Stephen is truly a wealth of information across so many topics. I have a feeling he will certainly stop by the tavern again on his travels. Please do visit Stefan's site at www.tentsmiths.com for all your tentage needs, including everything from tents to tarps, finials to floors, pins to poles, stakes, storage, and canvas by the yard. Once again, you can find him at tentsmiths.com. I would also like to take a moment to remind you, dear friends, that as we enter this event season, that merchants love to be paid in the coin of the realm. That's cash. It may be difficult to obtain the connections necessary to use your MasterCard, Lady Visa, Card of New Discoveries, or whatever card of your choice may be, but merchants will always accept your coin and money that folds. Our inspirational music, Vibrabimus, is used with permission by the amazingly talented Diabolis in Musica, the official minstrels of the Tavern. They offer so much more than the dulcet tones that welcome our guests to the Tavern. The travels of the Diabolis, Bazaar, and Sorry Party have taken them in search of the finest treasures inspired by the Silk Road. Their hand-selected wares include homeless saris ready to be adopted, shimmering silks with shiny shisha mirrors, jewelry and other bling things, and fresh made-to-order Turkish coffee. Look for the purple Vardo near the bathhouse at large events near you this summer. If you have the coin, they have the wares. So join us next month at the Tavern to find out where our beloved Anchoress is traveling next, to share a mazer or two of mead with witty, intelligent humor that brings light to the Dark Ages and revelry to the Renaissance, all found at the Time Traveler's Tavern. Like us, review us, and subscribe to us now on Podbean, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, iHeartRadio, Player FM, Podchaser, or your favorite podcatcher, and never miss an episode.